Coming up on the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol in Washington, D.C., with an in-depth analysis on how it impacts you. Plus, we've got the Secretary of Education under the Obama administration, Dr. John King, on the show to talk a little bit about what he's seeing in Washington, D.C. with the Department of Education and how that will impact you.
The ACSA legislative lunch break starts now.
And it's a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA legislative lunch break, along with Dr. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA's executive director. I'm Naj Alikhan, ACSA senior director of marketing communications. Welcome. We're honored to have you today. Go ahead and jump into the chat and say hello and let us know where you're watching from. Edgar, back in the co-host seat today.
I know. I left it to the professionals there for a week. I think you and Michael. I always have to just watch a little bit just to remember how it's done there. So I appreciate you guys caring. I was bummed to miss Secretary Duncan there and that interview. But yeah, we were in New Orleans for AASA, and it was a good time. A lot of our members back there, obviously talking about a lot of the issues that we're all talking about, topic of the show today. And I know we had a big week here with our own legislative action day here over the last couple of weeks. So a lot of our friends here in Sacramento. It's always a fun sight to see the other capital, the Sacramento capital here, taken over from by our ACSA members everywhere. So it's been a good week.
Been a very good week. We'll talk about our legislative action days in just a moment. We will have the Chancellor of the State University of New York. Also, the Secretary of Education, Dr. John King, will join us in a couple of moments. He and Arnie Duncan, as you mentioned, Edgar, put in an op-ed in Education Week a few weeks back. Really, really great points were made in that op-ed, so we'll talk to him about that in just a moment. First, let's go ahead and talk about our legislative action days, which happened over the last couple of days here in Sacramento. Nearly 300 ACSA members for this annual event. Now, this year, our members advocated on the priorities laid out in our One Voice for Students platform, which included robust and stable school funding, recruitment and retention, streamlined accountability, and student and educator wellness. This is the 45th edition of our Legislative Action Days. It's an annual event that's becoming more impactful each year.
It's important to be here in Sacramento for Legislative Action Days because it is a collective voice of all administrators across the state, all the way from the very northern regions, all the way to the southern regions, and we all come together, hundreds of us, and we collectively have one voice on certain topics that we advocate for that directly impacts students in classrooms.
It is a passion of mine to advocate for our students, our kids, to make sure that they have their needs and resources and they're able to be supported in our schools.
Yeah, incredible event, Edgar. I know you were over at the state capitol. I was too, seeing our members from our 19 ACSA regions talking with lawmakers and their staff. It's a great event. It's one of the ones that we look forward to every year, and it's a great opportunity for our members to be able to tell stories about what's happening in their community.
Yeah, I especially appreciated when we did a little census there at the beginning of the event of how many first-time administrators, first-time leaders that we had coming to do this type of advocacy. I think regardless of what we were talking about, the news in Sacramento or in DC, kind of we're always beating this drum. But if there was ever a time to make sure that the folks who are in charge of implementing all the stuff that they come up with here in Sacramento and DC, that they're the ones on the front lines to have their voices heard, the time is now. So it was great just to see that energy, the enthusiasm of folks really, what we like to say, utilizing that inherent influence they have just with their respective roles. So like you said, a great event, always a highlight of our year.
Yeah, absolutely. And we made mention of recruitment and retention. I want to get to this story because it works really well into our guest who's coming up. A federal judge has ordered the U.S. Department of Education to bring back some federal grants that were cut as part of the Trump administration's plan to end diversity programs. In the judge's opinion, It was stated that the department had acted arbitrarily and illegally when it ended a grant program designed to deliver $600 million, Edgar, to help put teachers in underserved schools. The judge also ordered the department to stop future cuts to those grants. Now, just for context, these grants support the programs that certify teachers for struggling districts, especially those who face challenges recruiting staff. Now, current U.S. Secretary of Education Linda McMahon claimed that these grants train teachers in social justice, activism, and other divisive ideologies. That, according to the New York Times, the judge, in her opinion, stated that the loss of the federal funds would harm students in schools with the fewest resources. And I'll just read you this quote from the judge's opinion. The judge said, "The harms plaintiffs identify also implicate grave effect on the public. Fewer teachers for students in high-need neighborhoods, early childhood education, and special education programs. Moreover, even to the extent defendants assert such an interest in ending DEI-based programs, they have sought to effect change by means the court finds likely violate the law." So, I mean, Edgar, we talked about recruitment and retention over at Legislative Action Days. We talked about how the educator shortage across the country is problematic. At least this judge, kicking back some of what the president is trying to do right now and get those federal grants back for these teachers.
Like we said, all this is so fluid. When after Inauguration Day, as some of the initial executive orders were coming through, I think we've been preaching that this is going to be a situation that's going to evolve by the day, by the week, and as we've seen it, and we obviously haven't seen the last of this. I'm so excited for our conversation today, because I think getting these perspectives, especially when you talk about the Department of Ed and all the elimination, folks don't really know sometimes pragmatically, what does that mean? What should I be worried about? Even our folks who are within the system, right? And I think just putting some context to that about what the practical impacts of all of this stuff coming out from DC is our objective. So yeah, looking forward to diving into that.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let's go ahead and bring in our guest right now. We're honored to have Dr. John King. He was the U.S. Secretary of Education from 2015 to 16 under President Barack Obama. He's also the Chancellor of the State University of New York. Dr. King, it is an honor to have you here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Let's start with that big news story that came on March 11th. The Department of Education laying off nearly half of its workforce. As someone who's been in the chair, spent your career fighting for public education, what was your reaction to that news?
Look, I was distressed and dismayed for students and for the country. The department has such critical roles to play in the education sector. The department is the place where we drive resources to help vulnerable students. The Title I program for students in schools serving low-income communities. The funding that runs through Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That funding that helps students with disabilities get the services they need. I worry about that. I worry about the funding for the Pell Grant program that helps folks access higher education, the student loan program, which is critical for low and middle income Americans having access to college. I worry about civil rights enforcement, which is a critical role that the department plays, protecting against discrimination on the basis of race, religion, gender. And I worry about the research and information role that the department plays. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, for example, the NAEP, which helps us understand where we're doing well and where we're struggling. All of that is in jeopardy. And then, of course, I was heartbroken for the people. Many of the folks who work at the department are former teachers, former principals, former student affairs administrators from higher ed institutions. These are folks who've committed to try to help improve American education, trying to help the country, and they're being treated so cruelly. It's really a very, very sad situation.
Dr. King, first of all, thank you for joining us today and making time for this conversation. And also just thank you for your service. I mean, and so many of your capacities, whether been there with the federal administration or so much of the other work that you've done along your career. I know that the focus has been trying to move the needle for kids, especially underserved communities. So just thank you for your efforts on that end. As Naj noted, you and your predecessor, former Secretary Arnie Duncan, co-wrote an article there in EdWeek talking about, you folks make the case that the stakes could not be higher right now in terms of what's at stake for public education. As the headline there shows, that in many ways there's a war within an attack on public education, especially because we talk so much about like that education is really focused at the local level, or so much of our funding comes from the state. Maybe give us a little bit of context, some of the arguments that you and Arnie Duncan made there in the article, or why you think that the stakes are so high right now.
You know, the vast majority of decisions about K-12 education happen at the state and local level. And the vast majority of funding comes at the state and local level. So then you ask, well, what is the federal role? Why does there need to be a U.S. education department? And it really is about civil rights. It's about equity. It's about ensuring that vulnerable students are getting additional support and are protected. And so if you dismantle the department, you lose that. And that's the real danger here. States and districts have a history of not always standing up for the most vulnerable students, of not always taking seriously their responsibility to make sure that students with disabilities have access to all the services they need to thrive. They have a history of not making sure that English learners get the support they need to be successful. And the department has been the place to intervene, to try to make sure that justice is advanced. And I'm very worried about what the landscape looks like without that.
Dr. King, we made mention of Linda McMahon just a couple of moments ago, and she has said that her directive from President Trump is to shut down the Department of Education. If he somehow gets around Congress and is able to shut down the department through executive order, what does this mean for the future of public education nationwide?
You know, I think about that picture that's behind you there, the picture of Ruby Bridges, that Norman Rockwell painting of Ruby Bridges integrating schools in New Orleans. You know, when you look at that picture, who's walking with her? Federal marshals. Why? Because the state did not want her to have access to education. So that's what I fear most here, is that this attack on the education department is part of a broader effort to dismantle public education, to undermine public education, to undermine the civil rights progress of the 1960s. You think about the work of the department, it's really shaped by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, a civil rights law, the Higher Education Act of 1965, a civil rights law. And so when you imagine a world without the department, you know, they say, well, all this will just be taken care of by other people. But what other people? It's not like they moved people from the department to other agencies. They fired them. They sent them away. Last week, there was a day where the FAFSA wasn't working, the free application for federal student aid, the way you access student aid in the United States. It wasn't working. And it took longer to fix it because the people who would have had that task have been fired. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at a breakdown of really a national responsibility to protect education for all.
Dr. I appreciate that connection, right? Because this goes to the heart of the question we often get, you know, and I think I speak for most educators, whether it be at the state or the federal level, most folks aren't for protecting the bureaucracy, right? Like they think of like the state government or the federal government. That's in some cases, those are even obstacles. But I think when you make it those concrete examples of that connection to some of the student services, I think that's a great reminder. Kind of along the same lines, probably the question we get the most when they've hearing the executive orders or have heard or seen the headlines over the last couple months is, as you noted, the federal funding. So if for those serving English learners, students with disabilities, students with low income families, would be families or educators, you know, well, how worried should folks be? You know, I know it's still unclear. The executive order hasn't come down. I know they're almost making the changes from within, as you noted, starting with dismissing the folks. But how do you see some of this playing out?
Well, look, my hope is that Congress will step up here. At the end of the day, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle have to understand these are their constituents. For example, we have 26 million students who are in schools that get Title I funding. If Title I funding were to go away, those schools would have to lay off teachers. They would have to reduce advanced placement classes, reduce extracurriculars, class sizes would grow. I'm hopeful that members on both sides of the aisle will say to themselves, that is not right. And they will stand up to protect Title I funding. You think about the IDEA funding. This is going to students with disabilities. We've got more than 7 million students with disabilities who are relying on those federal dollars to support services they desperately need. You're talking about folks who need speech language support. You're talking about folks who need intensive reading support. You're talking about students who are on the autism spectrum and need assistance in order to be able to access a quality education. Will that be there for them? Again, I hope Congress will step up and say, on both sides of the aisle, we're not going to be the ones who are going to take away from students with disabilities the services they desperately need. So at this point, I am certainly worried, but I will say, so far when you talk to members of Congress privately, both sides of the aisle, they say those programs are going to be safe. So the question is that how they're going to vote? That's what they say.
Yeah.
How they're going to vote.
And you almost just alluded to it. You referenced the question I was going to follow up, and because I think that's the rub, right? Like, we're hearing some of this privately, and we've seen those reports. Do you think at the end of the day, it just feels, given some of the politics of the day, can we rely on Congress to maybe be that protector?
Look, so far, I will say the courts, and you mentioned this in the lead-in, the courts have been willing to step up to enforce the law. That's good. Now we need Congress to step up to enforce American values. The vast majority of the public, both sides of the aisle, supports a national role in education, a federal role in education. The vast majority of the public thinks dismantling the education department is a bad idea. So we need Congress to reflect the will of the people. I worry, but at the same time, I started out as a high school social studies and civics teacher. I have to believe that at the end of the day, Congress will be responsive to their constituents. And we need, in this moment, to be talking throughout media channels, local town halls about why education matters, why the federal role in public education matters.
We have Dr. John King. He was the Secretary of Education from 2015 to 2016 under then President Barack Obama. If you have questions for Dr. King, go ahead and put those into the chat. We'll try and tackle some of those. In fact, we were just talking, Dr. King, you and Edgar were talking about kind of the environment in Washington, D.C., about what is being said privately and what may be done publicly. Scott Borba, one of our administrators, asked this question: do you believe that there is bipartisan common ground in education policy today, or has it become too polarized? What's your look at that?
I mean, it certainly is very polarized. You see these attacks on teaching the truth about our history. Some states that are literally trying to ban conversations about things like slavery and the civil rights movement. You see places where folks are taking down posters of Harriet Tubman or taking books out of the library. It's very worrisome. You see polarization around the voucher issue in some states that are trying to steer money away from public schools to private schools. So I do worry about that. On the other hand, when you survey the public, there's tremendous support for public education, tremendous support for expanding early childhood education. And you hear governors on both sides of the aisle talking about that, the importance of a good early start, the importance of expanding pre-K. There is, I think, a real consensus around the country that we need to do better on teaching reading and a national conversation about how we leverage the best research to improve reading instruction. a lot of interest across the country in expanding quality career and technical education. So I do think while there is a lot of polarization, there are areas of common ground, and I wish we were spending more time, at least at the federal level, talking about those areas of common ground.
Dr. King, one of the other issues related to all this is that there seems to be a renewed attack or a new attack on just the whole concept of DEI programs, or even the language. You know, we've seen so many examples, to the extent that we really have folks in the field now questioning, are they going to be vulnerable because they have affinity groups, because they've put an emphasis on this front? One, what do you make of this new renewed this front on this battle on DEI? And then what would you say to maybe critics? We have a diverse set of administrators, like we even in California, right? Like with different views and whatnot, that there's some folks who say, hey, the time has come, DEI programs, they're divisive or they're not necessary. What do you say to folks that when you hear that level of argument?
Yeah, I guess I'd say a couple of things. One, diversity, equity, inclusion, those are American values. We haven't always lived up to the promise of democracy and equality for all, but we know that our path to those values, democracy and equality for all, comes through celebrating our diversity. The fact that we have such varied backgrounds comes through delivering on the promise of equal protection under the law that is enshrined in the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. That's what equity is about. We know that achieving democracy and opportunity for all comes through inclusion, making sure that everybody gets a seat at the table. That's why the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is so important. So how do we rebuild a consensus that those are shared American values? And how do we remind people that we're strong enough as a country to grapple with the truth that we haven't always lived up to those values? You know, my great-grandfather was enslaved. Now think about that. There are folks who, their great-grandfather is babysitting them right now. My great-grandfather was enslaved in Maryland, about 25 miles from where I lived while I served in the Obama administration. And I had the opportunity to visit the property where my great-grandfather was enslaved, to stand inside of the cabin that's still standing on the property where he was enslaved. Property is still owned by the family. They're direct line descendants of the family that enslaved my family. And when I was standing inside that cabin, I was thinking about two things. One, the incredible cruelty of the institution of slavery. That cabin is not 30 feet from the main house. These were two families living in the same space, one owning the other. My great-grandfather. That's only 3 generations removed. But the other thing I was thinking about standing inside that cabin was how profound it is that in 3 generations, my family went from enslaved in that cabin to serving in the cabinet of the nation's first Black president. So that's the American story. Yes, the horrible cruelty of the institution of slavery. That is a terrible truth which we must reckon with. And tremendous progress towards greater opportunity in our society. That's reflected in my family's journey. We are big enough, strong enough to grapple with both of those truths. And I hope that that's the kind of work we can do in our classrooms. Help students grapple with that dual reality, where we've fallen short, where we've made progress.
Dr. King, beyond DEI, we're also seeing this effort to reshape how history and social studies are taught in schools. And if we start limiting what students can learn, what does that mean for our next generations?
It's very dangerous to our ability to make progress. You know, if you don't understand your history, you're doomed to repeat it. We need students to have an appreciation for the past, for the struggles of the past and the progress of the past. We also need students to be prepared to be engaged participants in our civic life. That means they have to be prepared to hear things they might disagree with. They need to learn how to disagree agreeably, how to listen to someone whose perspective is different from your own, not just waiting for your turn to tell them why they're wrong, but actually to try to understand what's motivating them. Why do they believe what they believe? Those habits of civic education can't be taught in an environment where we deny the truth of our history and we cover up the hard parts of our history. We also need students to see themselves reflected in the classroom, to get to read books by authors who connect with them and their experience. And we need them to read books by authors who are totally different from them so that they can learn empathy and to appreciate experiences different from their own. What's happening now is really undermining not just our core American values, but undermining the quality of education that we give to our students.
Dr. King, thank you just for being so generous again with your time. And one final question. I was taken by just on a personal with your answer on just your story. And it really does put in perspective just when you talk about in that short time, both the changes and opportunity in this country, but also not to take for granted, those challenges and that risk. So with that said, I know for most of our educators, teachers in the classroom, classified employees, supporting their students, for our members, the administrators, whether it be a principal, your superintendent, they're showing up to work every day, putting their head down and just doing the work, right? Trying to serve kids. All this could be very overwhelming. Just final thoughts from you of just what's your message to them? And then for those who maybe, I know we got a question in the chat there from one of our viewers about, for those of us wanting to influence everything happening, what's your message to all those folks?
Yeah. Well, two things. One is make your voice heard. It's important for educators to communicate, whether it's to elected officials or to business leaders or to philanthropic leaders, what their views are. We need to hear from educators, and educators are well positioned to speak up for their students. But the second thing I would say is, please keep going. I know that the moment right now can feel daunting and discouraging, but teachers are saving lives every day. School administrators, the environments they create for kids are saving lives every day. Another part of my story is that when I was a kid, both my parents passed away when I was little. My mom when I was 8, my dad when I was 12. When I lived with my dad, he was very sick with Alzheimer's. Home was incredibly difficult. The thing that saved me was school. PS 276 in Canarsie, Brooklyn. And having teachers who made school a place that was safe and engaging and nurturing. And they didn't know what I was going through at home, but they cared enough to make school a place where I could be a kid when I wasn't able to be a kid outside of school. I know educators on this call today are doing that for thousands of young people. I'm thankful to you. I am sorry that we are in the political moment we are in, but I hope you will keep going and know that you are making a huge difference in the lives of young people.
Dr. John King, U.S. Secretary of Education from 2015-2016 in the Obama administration and the Chancellor of the State University of New York. Dr. King, it's been an honor to have you here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. You are welcome back anytime. Don't think that you have to stay around just on in the New York time zone. You're welcome to come back anytime.
Thanks so much. Great to see you all.
Thank you so much. Edgar, I do want to point this out. Dr. Kim was talking so much about erasing history, and I had heard a little bit about this story this morning, and then Neri, our loyal viewer, brought this back up. And it is that the story of Jackie Robinson's Army career has been wiped away from the military website in another DEI purge by the Obama administration. Again, it's one of those instances, Edgar, where we talk so much about, the federal administration trying to, limit what students can learn, taking away some of this country's history for their own, wants and desires. This one, I mean, there's so much that goes into Jackie Robinson's story beyond just breaking the color barrier in baseball and just seeing another piece of history kind of wiped away. It speaks to some of what Dr. King was saying.
Yeah, I mean, Naj, something we've said a lot over the last couple of months that it's really not about politics. It's not really about who's in office. I think I would hope at some point, regardless of our personal views, that we could take a step back, that this is dangerous precedent, right? One, like Dr. King has said it, and regardless of what political persuasion we may have, just like the values of understanding our history, both good and bad, is so important for us moving forward, right? So when I see stories like this, it makes us think that we can't take all of this for granted. I mean, I think Dr. King's story, tracing just where this country started and where we're at today, and his really was, he's talking about a success story. But I think I know it almost sounds cliche, but I think any effort to just restrict what we're learning, what has happened, it's just such a dangerous path to go on. And I do hope, I appreciated his message, a hopeful one, that at some point in time, forget politics, that we do hope that, especially when we're talking about education, that there's some room for some consensus here about what actually makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, politics, as we've said, politics is not going to help students learn to read and write. And that's really what educators are so focused on right now, is making sure that the students get the education that they need. Let's talk about a couple of events that are coming up for you. First, coming tomorrow is our Critically Conscious Classroom. That is our exclusive ACSA web series. Take a look.
Sawabona family, welcome to the Critically Conscious Classroom.
I'm super hyped for this show today.
Doing this work is courageous. Starting this show is courageous. This is unprecedented.
We definitely stand on the shoulders of those that have come before us in terms of doing this work. And every time we build and build and build. So I think, there's more to come, right?
Where are the lawmakers? What are they doing? Why are they so quiet? I would pick up the phone and put your legislator on speed dial and call them 10 times a day.
Drop the mic right there.
Class is dismissed. In honor of my boy, Chuck Woolery, we'll catch you in 2 and 2.
Yes, that's the Critically Conscious Classroom. It's an exclusive ACSA web series. We have put the link into the chat. Got to register for it, and you can be part of the CCC family. Already more than 500 educators are registered for tomorrow's show, which begins at 2 p.m. So go ahead and get registered for that. You don't want to miss out. Also want to tell you about our Lead with Pride Symposium that is coming up April 30th through May 2nd in Anaheim. Out, proud, and moving forward. Again, the 2025 Lead with Pride Summit. You can click that QR code after our show is done to go directly to the registration page, or you can go to ACSA.org/professional-learning for more information and for registration. And folks, if you like what you've seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, we invite you to subscribe to us on YouTube or like us on Facebook. When you do, you will get instant alerts when we're about to come on the air with breaking news, and then reminders for our regularly scheduled show on Wednesdays. And if you have great stories happening in your school communities, we want to tell your stories. Go ahead and send in your news releases, your talking points, and your photos to our EdCal editor, Michelle Carl, at mcarl@axa.org. Edgar, I just want to give you 30 seconds here. I know that we're past the bottom of the hour, but this is, this is the importance, I think, of not just the work that our educators are doing, right? But the fact that the former Secretary of Education, 2 shows in a row, have wanted to be here to talk about the education landscape and the impact on educators and students, I think speaks to the importance of the work that's being done, but also just having Dr. King talk about his story and why he sees so many things as so pivotal to the next generations of Americans.
No, I really appreciated his and it came from a very pragmatic approach, right? Like, we get so caught up in the narrative, in the fight and whatnot, but he kind of broke it down, especially from his vantage point in his capacity that had as secretary, but also a lot of the work he's done, tracing it back to him as a teacher. And I think talking about what he sees as some of the impacts of all of this. And like I said, I think him making that connection, I think it's a reminder. It's a reminder on all these fronts. A reminder that we cannot take for granted. We cannot forget. And I know it's something that we're going to continue to be focused on, of what all of this action, what is the ultimate effect for our folks. And I appreciated the question. So now what can we do about it? And gave some pragmatic advice on that end as well.
Yeah. Folks, thank you so much for joining us here on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Remember, we are live here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube Wednesdays. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.